micro nano education for everyone.
We're excited to have Dr. Yodong with us from UC Riverside, who's going to be talking to us about colorful and smart nanoscale materials. Dr. Yodong, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Yatong Yin. I'm a professor at the UC Riverside. I'm in the chemistry department. It's actually good to talk after Aziz because he already introduced a lot of concepts. And so today I'm going to talk about something we have been working on for a long time, about these plasmonic nanomaterials, how we make them colorful and how we make them smart. Okay. And when we talk about color, there are actually different meanings. Typically, you see the pigments, right? Normally, you see reflection from the material, and then you perceive that as a color. And that's a typical case, but as Aziz talked about, there are some materials that can emit light. And so that's like quantum dots or the glow sticks that you see over, Thanksgiving or Halloween. You see glow sticks. Those are light emitting materials, and the color you see actually is the direct wavelengths they emit. Okay, and there's another type of material. Let me just switch to the laser pointer. There are another type of material that themselves actually don't emit light, and they don't absorb actually either, but they actually have this so-called thin film interference. A typical example is these soap bubbles, and it's just water and transparent. But if you make them into a thin film, you see very bright, beautiful color. And that's because of the thin film interference. So people actually use all these kind of physical phenomena to design materials, make them colorful. Okay, and so as Aziz has already pointed out, nanoparticles has so-called plasmonic properties. So if we just look at the gold, silver, and in our daily experience, we know silver is silver color and gold is golden color, right? And this was actually a picture posted in online media. They actually drew a cartoon for the gold particles. That's how they imagined. And so it's still golden color, but the reality is now when you make gold into nanoparticles in water, for example, and they are actually ruby red, very beautiful ruby red color. Okay, and if you make silver into nanoparticle, and they are not silvery color, it's actually brightly yellow color. Okay. And so why is that? It's related to so-called localized surface plasmon resonance, or we just call it the plasmonic effect sometimes. So basically, that's the collective resonant oscillation of the free electrons of the conduction band of matter particles that gives us a very strong absorption and scattering at particular wavelengths. So basically, light is electromagnetic wave, right? And you have electric field. When the light hits the particle, the electric field will actually induce the movement of the free electrons. And this induced movement will lead to, at particular wavelengths, will lead to a resonance. So that resonance will give us very strong extinction peak in UVVs, and that corresponds to the particular color. In this case, for gold, the extinction peak is going to be in 520 nanometers, around that. So that includes two parts. One is scattering, one is absorption. Okay, and so this type of material is not really new. And in old churches, they actually use this silver gold nanoparticles to make glasses and put on the window. So that's the kind of those windows you see in those old churches. Okay, and people actually know how to make them, but they don't really know. A few hundred years ago, they don't know exactly why is that. Okay, and so about 30 years ago, people start to look at these kind of particles again and try to synthesize them in the chemistry lab. And so why do we want to look at that again? And why do we want to make these structures in the chemistry lab again? The motivation certainly is because of their unique properties and their applications. As Aziz has pointed out, these materials can be used for biomedicine, can be used for bioanalysis. You can use them for imaging. Okay, and so what we do in the chemistry lab, and the interesting thing about this nanostructure, plasmonic nanostructure, is that they have very strong dependence. Their properties have very strong dependence on the size and shape of the particles. So that basically means if we use chemical methods to make them in different shapes, we actually are going to get different properties. So for example, the same gold, if we make them into nanorods, and we don't have to change the shape, we just have to control the length. Once we have different lengths, you're going to have all kinds of colors. Okay, and you can make a rainbow out of these nanorods just by controlling the aspect ratio of the particles. And if you take the extinction spectra, you're going to see that they have very distinct peaks, corresponds to the different aspect ratios of the nanorods. Okay, and so this is the case for gold, and same thing for silver. And in the chemistry lab, we can make them into sphere, we can make them into cubes, and bipyramids, all these kind of different shapes. They call it, they have different optical properties. If we just talk about color, they're going to be differently colored. Okay, and here's another example. This was published like 10 years ago in my lab. We use a very simple chemistry, silver nitrate. We reduce that by sodium boron hydride. And these two are the key components. We have this citrate as so-called ligand, and that binds to the particle surface. And these two H2O2 actually control the nucleation. And I don't want to go into too much details, but by playing with chemistry, we can actually reduce the silver cation into metallic silver and make nanoparticles, and we can control their shape. In this particular case, with this particular combination, we actually can make silver nanoplates. As you can see, they're kind of triangular shaped, and they are thin and like 10 nanometer in thickness. And here is like 50 nanometers in lateral dimension. Okay, and we can control their lateral dimension, and we can control their optical property or the color. Okay, and again, same material, we can have all kinds of optical properties. Okay, and we can also control the properties by the so-called coupling, plasmonic coupling. And basically, if the particles are close to each other, their electron resonance behavior is going to be affected by the neighboring particle. Okay, so and then the optical property will be different. And in this case, this was published a few years ago, and we made silver nanoparticles and use polyacrylic acid as the capping ligand. So they basically wrap the particle surface. And normally we add a lot of these kind of capping ligands. We make these isolated particles in solution, they disperse very well. But later we realized that if we reduce the amount of the ligands, and the particles wouldn't be stable in the solution in water, and then they start to aggregate. By controlling the aggregation process, we actually can control the optical property or the color as well. For example, in this case, initially, if they don't aggregate, you have this bright yellow color. And then when you start to see the aggregation, and the color becomes orange and red and eventually blue. Okay, so that's a kind of simple experiment, really demonstrate the so-called plasmonic coupling property. And because the surface is covered with polyacrylic acid, and we can actually control the deprotonation of this acid, for example, by adding hydroxide into the solution, and then the particle surface becomes highly charged, and then they have strong repulsion force between the particles. So this kind of aggregation will break up and go back to this isolated particle situation, and then you get this yellow color. If you add acid and then you protonize this acid group and you lose charges, and then these particles start to aggregate again. So you can do many cycles of this kind of color tuning just by changing the chemical environment. And we went actually further, and we couple this kind of nanoparticle aggregation behavior with the hydrolysis reaction of this sodium borate. I'm not going to go into the detail, but this sodium borate, when it sees water, it actually releases the hydroxide anions, and the hydroxide will deprotonate the acid, help us to separate particles. So just want to show you, we made a thin film of silver by this same particle, and when your finger actually get close and not touching, it's getting close to the film, and the moisture from your fingertip actually can induce the particle separation that corresponds to the color change, the yellow color you see. Okay, and so this shows very sensitive humidity sensing behavior. Okay, and Aziz actually mentioned that these particles can be used for photothermal therapy, and that's because there's a energy conversion process, and when the light illuminated particles, we said they have absorption, they have scattering, right? So the light absorbed by the particles are actually converted into heat, and so the particles can become really hot, and people use that property to kill the tumor cells, and so that's the photothermal therapy. And they use that property to generate a photoacoustic signal. So that's for the that can be used for imaging, and you can use that property to initiate drug delivery. And very recently, I participate in a big project on this cryopreservation. So we try to use this method, use this material to help with the cryopreservation. And so this is a huge collaboration. We work with Massachusetts General Hospital, UC Berkeley, and University of Minnesota, and it was NSF supported center. And so our job actually is not to cool the cell or the body, and our job actually is to recover, because that turns out to be a much more challenging job than just to cool it down. Okay, and so on our side, we try to use this phenomena for making so-called smart materials. I see some a student asked whether we use these plasmonic materials for making motors. We actually do that. Here, I just want to show you some examples. And so we made these copper nanorods. Copper is also a plasmonic material. And then here you can see that once we illuminate the material with light, in this case it's IR light, and then this region with the particles actually becomes hot, and this is the IR camera image, and you see it becomes really hot, and then we can use these materials to initiate localized heating. And for example, we embed these copper nanorods into a polymer thin film and just embed into polymer and then fold it. And once you fold it, the thin film cannot really recover just because of some of the energy barrier there, and the polymer chain cannot really go back to straight condition, and unless you provide some energy to overcome the energy barrier. So what we can do here is actually to use light to just illuminate this point, the joint point, and then heat up that locally, and you can see that it will recover. So just show you the video. You can see that we can open up the flower petal one by one. And the beauty here is that we can use light to locally heat up the joint, and so you can open the pedal one by one. Okay, and this is another example we made. This is a kind of a robot that can be excited to climb up the hill. And this is a so-called bimorph structure. We made two thin films. One has this plasmonic material, one doesn't. So the when you illuminate the light, and when you illuminate light, the material with the light, and then one side got heated, and so it expands. So that's why it curves. So we use that behavior, and then we use light on and off to control the contraction and expansion of the thin film, so you can climb up the hill. And very recently, we start to make quite complicated nanostructures incorporating magnetic component and plasmonic components. So in this case, you don't have to worry about the synthesis step. Just to look at the final product, we have gold nanorods. This is the red one. We have iron oxide magnetic nanorods parallel to each other. And so after we make these structures in solution, and we can actually use the magnetic field to control their orientation so that they can exhibit particular excitation mode. As I showed you before, the plasmonic nanorods actually have two peaks, and here, once we use magnetic field to control their orientation, we can excite only one mode. And so, for example, in this case, if they are vertical standing, and you get the green color, and that corresponds to the longitudinal mode, or this long wavelength mode. And if we make them horizontal, and then you only see the transverse mode. Okay, so I'll skip all those details, just tell you that we can, in this case, we can make a robot out of these kind of materials. And the beauty here is that we can control the orientation of the nanorods in the legs of this robot, and one leg with vertical orientation, the other leg with horizontal, and then they respond to light differently. And so if we use a polarization, we change the polarization of the light, we can heat up the leg, and only one leg, and so they will move forward, and then we can do that alternatingly, and then the robot will move. As you can see, this robot can actually work under the light. Okay, and another example, we use this photothermal effect of these nanoparticles to generate vapors in a thin film. This is again polymer film containing hydrogel and containing nanoparticles inside. And hydrogel means we have a lot of water inside. So when the light illuminates this kind of thin film, the nanoparticles got really hot, and so they basically boil the water inside, generate vapors. So the vapor is, when the vapor escapes from the thin film, it generates vibration. And it turns out that vibration or oscillation is actually periodical, and it has a defined frequency depending on the property of the material we have. So anyway, we use that vibration, photothermal generated vibration, as a power source to drive the movement of this nano swimmer. So basically, we have a thin film like that attached to the a substrate that can float on the surface, and so when you on the surface of water, basically, and then if we illuminate that sample with light, and you start to see the vibration. That vibration, just like fish tail, and you can drive the movement of this swimmer to go forward. Okay, so this is type of nanomodel or robot that we built in the lab. Okay, so we have a few of these kind of examples, but due to time limit, I don't really want to go into too many examples. So anyway, so this is my group. Now it's much smaller. Before I had about 30 students, but after the pandemic, it shrinked a lot. And I also thank the funding from NSF and other funding agencies. And I would be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Dr. Yin, and especially like the way that you tied in what Dr. Aziz was talking about and kind of continued the conversation. A couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One from, well, actually both from two of our mentors. Dr. Dominic from CCP asks if you use quantum dots for multicolor flow cytometry or confocal microscopy.
Oh, hi. Actually, that was earlier for Aziz working with Plasmonic, so it just didn't get picked up. And thinking about if they were doing work on biological applications with some of the plasmonics that they were studying and things like that.
Dr. Aziz, you want to jump in?
I think quantum dots, I think people avoid them because they are harmful, not like plasmonics, especially Yadon. I think he's very well, he made very good gold, silver nanoparticles that are not poisonous for a human body. So we avoid quantum dot, but in principle, what we can do with plasmonics, we can do with quantum dots, especially if we dop them with metals. It will give us even more control.
Yeah, I just want to add that people are actually making safer quantum dots like zinc sulfides, zinc oxide, those kind of safer quantum dots. And the efficiency is not as good as the old ones that like cadmium selenide, but it's safer, so still usable.
Thanks for updating me on this. I remember when they first came out as a way to stain samples and do multicolor flow or multicolor imaging on a fluorescent microscope, and it seems things have come a long way in a decade since I first remember working with them. So it's amazing to see it progress.
Yeah, that was the symbol of nanotechnology for a long time. Whenever people talk about nanotechnology, people use quantum dots as the example to show that they are very useful.
Thank you so much for answering those. One question from Dr. Folson at Purdue is, what makes when you were talking about the lighting, using the light to activate different sides of the material, what makes the curved biomaterial move in one direction versus another?
Oh, actually, here we don't really have, okay, let's, if you're talking about these, we don't really have much control on the direction. We can do control, but here we just illuminate the sample in the middle, and then they just go straight. But if you illuminate sample from side, and then they're gonna go turn around. Yeah.
Actually, 2 slides before, the one going up the hill, that's curved. That's the one I was wondering about. Okay. Why did it go up the hill instead of down the hill?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Clearly, I was trying to cheat, but so you see that there's steps. There are steps that my student cut. So okay. when the basically the film doesn't know which direction to go, but when you shrink, and you shrink both sides, right? This end is going to go up, this end is going to go down. But because we have these steps, and once it's up, it cannot go down. And so that's why this was our first version of the robot. And it's not perfect, but it can climb. And then later we developed something that can really work on just a flat surface, like what we showed here. Let's see.
Great, like a ratchet.
Yeah. And here it's on just a flat surface, and much better version.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Score had a question.
Yes, I was just wondering how often the spectrophotometer was used during this kind of research.
Spectrophotometer. Yeah, we have to measure the absorption scheduling all the time, and so we use that. That's our kind of first step characterization. We always have to use that. Yeah. Yeah, and here suddenly I skip all the details and just to show you, the cool effect in the end.
Well, yes, that was sort of, I guess, just a lead up question to my overall curiosity about this research. I was really, I wanted to ask about the lifespan as far as like the material that's used, how often, because it seems really energy efficient, being able to move an object using light. So I was just kind of wondering if you could touch on its, yep. Environmental applications as far as
so
cost efficiency.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. For silver and gold, and particularly gold, they are very stable chemically, and so we don't have to worry about that. But under light, because these nanorods, they are not thermodynamically stable. So if the light illumination is very strong, you generate a lot of heat, and if the heat cannot dissipate very quickly, and then the gold nanorod can melt. And that adds a little bit complexity about the stability. But here, to drive this kind of movement, we don't have to use a very strong laser. And so there's no problem with stability, okay? And if we use something like copper, as I showed in this case, so copper is not chemically stable, especially if you make them into nanorods, nanostructures, and so they can get oxidized relatively easier. So that's why, as you can see here, this structure is made with a coating on that, and this is a polymer coating and cross-linked polymer, and so that makes this copper very stable. It isolates the chemical environment, and so you don't have much oxidation going on, and so that makes them stable. And for most of the applications, we don't have to worry about the stability, and this once you have the protection, they are okay. Yeah.
Awesome. One question from Keelan. So the question is, have you ever done plasmonics research in biological applications like artificial photosynthesis?
Yeah, we do biomedical applications, but we don't really do photosynthesis, and that's a big topic, and very broad topic, and we don't have that manpower and the resources to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Ying, thank you so much for the presentation. You really brought to light some of the, how nano micro technology, how interest in these science and math fields can really turn into really cool, interesting research topics and career opportunities. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.